Hey everybody, it's Romania Black, and we're on episode 11 of Monster. And so I made a slight Christmas purchase for myself. I have the first volume. I had been told that the English translation of the manga is actually quite hard to get, and so on a whim, I went to a bookstore outlet and was like, I wonder if they just have it. And they did. And I was like, oh, and this sucker's big. Look at that. And so there are 9 volumes of Monster total. And so I was like, well, I'll just go ahead while I'm thinking of it and just order this first volume because who knows when it'll come up again. So I did. I'm really excited about it. I'm happy that I have it. Thank you, Patreon. But I'm really happy. And so I think what I would like to do is maybe like I was gonna do like every 10 episodes, try to get, because I've looked through this and realized that this manga volume 1 actually ends where episode 9 ends. And I was like, oh, okay, well, maybe at first I was like, maybe every 10 episodes I'll try to get a volume. And then someone in the chat, I think it was Minot, was like, oh, well, then you'll need 2 after you're done with episode 70. And I was like, oh. So I might do every 9 episodes. So maybe around the time that I get to episode 19, I'll order volume 2. If I can find it. So, but I'm really excited. The manga is beautiful. It's pretty much just exactly like the anime. So I like that there's a pretty faithful adaptation. There's not too many differences at all. It reminds me a lot of Banana Fish. That Banana Fish's manga to anime adaptation is really good. Now, there is some storylines that have been cut from the anime for Banana Fish, but it was only 24 episodes, so that makes sense. This series being like 74, I feel like it can go the full adaptation from the manga, which is exciting. But yeah, the one thing I will notice that the manga does a lot better than the anime is that Tenma, for example, and we'll talk about this page. Tenma, for example, looks a lot younger in the first couple of chapters because it was 9 years prior. I didn't feel in the anime like it doesn't feel like it's been 9 years. It just doesn't. Whereas in the manga, you definitely feel that Tenma is a bit older by the time we get to the whole episodes 8 and 9. But I had someone a while back ask me if I would go back to those verses that were at the very beginning, and I was like, I don't know, that feels spoilery, like you're trying to give me hints to something. But as I read the manga, it came up again, and I was like, okay. And so we have on our first page, I like this idea that when you open up the cover, right? When you open up the cover, there's Tenma, right? There's Tenma there, but then there's a black filter over it, and it focuses on his eye. It's very cool. It's very, very cool. But there is this very creepy page right before we start chapter 1. We have the prologue where Tenma performs the surgery, right? And then we have this very ominous page. Very ominous. It creeped me out when I first opened it, right? But here's the thing that's kind of creepy about it. If you look at it, it's very hard to make out what that is. And I've thought about it for about, the last couple days, looking at it. What it looks like is Tenma and Johan superimposed over the top of each other, because it has like Johann's hair and it has like the dark shadow bottom of the face, like if Tenma had a beard, but the eyes are not quite Johann's. They're not pretty enough. They look more like Tenma's eyes. So it looks like if you superimposed Tenma over the top of Johan, that would be what you get, which is interesting because here is the line from the book. And I saw a beast rise up out of the sea, having 7 heads and 10 horns, and upon his horns 10 crowns, and upon his heads the name of blasphemy. And they worshipped the dragon which gave power unto the beast. And they worshipped the beast, saying, who is like unto the beast? Who is able to make war with him? So, Revelation of St. John the Divine, 13:1-4. Fun times! So, to me, at this point in the story, it's telling me that maybe Tenma is going to have to become a monster to kill a monster, right? That seems to be the path that he's heading down. He's becoming a monster so he can possibly take care of a monster, which is a thing in itself, right? And I think that also ties to the one comment that I had going into this episode, which was from Evil Communist Pickle Rick. Beautiful handle name. That says the OP of this series actually has 2 lines of dialogue. Only 2. The rest of it is instrumental. But the 2 lines of dialogue is actually 1 line repeated twice, which is the monster deep in his lair. And why would we repeat it twice? Well, because maybe we're looking at the monster of Johan and the monster that Tenma will become. Maybe! We'll have to see. But the OP is called Grain, which is interesting. And then the ED is called Love of Life. And I don't want the Love of Life lyrics. I don't want those. I feel like that's going to be something when I get to either the OP ED changes or I get to the end of the series, that's going to be something I look up on my own, right? But I think that was really interesting. So, but yeah, really excited to have the first volume. I'm very glad that it covers episodes 1 through 9. And by the time that this came in the mail, I'd already recorded episode 10. So I was like, because I wanted to open up and read it. And I was like, and I don't want to look up what chapters the volumes cover because I don't want to be spoiled. So I was like, surely it's made it through episode 9 or 10. Surely it's made it through the first 10 episodes. And man, covers a lot of ground. We covered the first 9 episodes in this volume alone. So if you're curious, episodes 1 through 9 are covered. It ends with Tenma with his gun going and ends really cute with the mercenary and the little girl, right? It ends with old, not Brad, but what's his face? You know his name. That he ends up going there, so. But yeah, fun times. Fun times. But yeah, so that's what I've got. I could sit here and just read it again, so I'm going to stop doing that. But we're on episode 11 of Monster. The last episode was Insanity. There was a lot happening. Just Heckle's still okay, him and Tenma. But where do we go to from here? And Johann's making his move. Johann's in Verdun, making his move, killing couples. Where do we go to from here? But it is staunchly cold outside. It's only like 3 degrees Fahrenheit outside. It has been a blistering cold day, and it's late at night, and I've got my cup of decaf coffee because I don't want to be up any later. And I'm like, I don't know what I want to do. I was like, I could watch something, and then I thought I want to watch Monster. So, cheers. But yeah, we're just going to see. We're going to see what's going to happen, right? I'm sure it'll be fine, right? So, we are going to start Monster episode 9. Here in 3, 2, 1, and let's just, I'm sure it'll be fine, but let's do this. Well, an episode. I knew I had to bring Whiteboard Kuhn out. Like the moment we were like 1 minute in and talking about East Germany and West Germany and all the politics, I was like, yeah, we're going to need to bring Whiteboard Kuhn out and talk about this. But let me say this. Please do not give any hints, clues, or spoilers in the comments down below without spoiler tagging. And if you're on Patreon, please be careful because I'm not going to lie, I felt a little bummed at the end of this episode because a few weeks ago in the Discord, somebody on the channel was saying, oh, this has some comparisons to Spy Family. And I was like, what's the comparisons to Spy Family? Because I couldn't place it. I was like, huh? And then the moment she said experimental laboratories, I was like, did I just get spoiled? Is Johan a psychic? Is that... I'm not going to lie. I'm going to be really upset if I got spoiled this early on about something major like that. I'm going to be kind of bummed out, and this reaction won't be as good. So I'm like, damn it. So hopefully that's not the case, but please don't tell me if it is or not. Just let me be ignorant. That's why I get really bummed when people like try to give me hints or stuff, because I'm like, I'm not dumb. I can put 2 and 2 together. I'm pretty perceptive. So I'm just, that really bums me out, because I'm like, if that surprise is spoiled now, I'm going to be really bummed. But hopefully that's not the case. Hopefully it's something more bigger, elaborate than that, and we'll just find out as we go. But, that really just like, I was like, oh, crap. So... but that's fine. We've got lots to talk about beyond just that potential thing. So, we need to go through this episode because there was quite a lot happening. Quite a lot. And the idea of things, of people not appearing as they seem to be, right? Because the one guy that was in charge of the Ministry of Internal Affairs, he seemed, when he was talking to Tenma, like a really nice guy that had all of these young men that he helped foster and put into these great homes. And he was just a really upstanding citizen, just doing his part to help these orphans out have a place to live till they were adopted. But then once we find out with him and Deiter, no, he's been abusive and he's been really bad to this kid. And he's not wholesome like he seems. So we need to talk about this of appearances. Of appearances and how they appear or don't appear. So we'll see about that. But I want to go back to this episode and start it. I like that this one guy, this property guy, was just like, he's like, oh yeah, this is some wonderful property. It's like all grown up. There's like grass growing everywhere. He's like, it's a convenient 20-minute drive from Berlin. And then he's like, don't mind the murder that the family that was murdered. Granted, they weren't murdered there. So we need to put down some like historical, geographical stuff, right? All right. So we have where the Lieberts was former East Berlin. Okay. Formerly on the east side. And I'm not up on my history of East and West Germany nearly as much as I should be. I should probably research it a little bit before the next episode. In a nice neighborhood, a nice former guy. I love Tenma looks so skeptical about it. He's just like, I don't know. It's rare to find this property on the former east side. Yeah, and Tenma's like, I'm really just here to check out the Lieberts' home. And he's like, ugh, are you kidding? He's like, you're not here as a customer, really? Like, I love that he instantly drops the charade and he just is so frustrated. He's like, why am I even showing you this place? And so he tells him that, he's like, Tenma's like, I need to find out something. And I like that this whole time we've been like, what is Tenma carrying in his bag? And it's like his clothes and medical supplies. He's like a doctor ready to go, right? It's great. And he's like, I wouldn't know anything about an official who died 10 years ago. And he's like, well, they adopted twins while they were here. And he wants to know where the twins were from. And this guy's like not giving him anything. And he's like, can you introduce me to the landlord? And he says, most of the land in the former East Side is the property of Jewish capitalists who escaped the Nazi regime. So he says that most of the property of the East is now from the Jewish population who has basically developed up since the end of World War II. Which is interesting. He says here the Eastern government was paying foreign countries and capitalists from the West Side and borrowing land. So the government was paying people from the West Side. Okay. So the government was paying the West Side and buying land. So he's saying that it's changed hands, and finding the landlord is not going to be very easy. It's going to be quite difficult. The landlord is overseas. He's like, it's not, we can't just call him up and ask him. Besides, my company is a West Side real estate company. He's like, I really don't know anything. My company's with the West Side. So there's still that division there, right? And that prospered after the destruction of the wall. I don't know anything about the past. That's such a statement. I don't know anything about the past. That's so interesting, right? Because I feel like that line is applicable to many characters and many situations in this story so far. Like, Tenma doesn't know anything about Johann's past. People know about Johan, but only so much or so little. They don't really have a lot to give him. And everyone is kind of in denial of how things were, which again, there's a historical context that kind of seeps in there as well. So it's just like, it's like shuffling things under the rug, and Tenma's trying to lift up the rug to see what's under there. It's very interesting. I like this guy. He's like, now I'm going to lock the gate. Get out. He's like, I don't want to show you this nice property now. He's like, well, is there anybody that remembers the Lieberts? And he's like, this is a residential area for ex-government officials. Most fled after the wall came down. So we established that it was a residential area for government officials, and most fled after the wall came down. Okay. Interesting. Again, we talk about the appearance from the Ministry of, especially from the officials from the Ministry of the Interior. So the mystery grows, right? So this nice neighborhood was housing people involved in maybe top secret affairs. Curious, right? So, some things we need to know about the Lieberts. It was a place of government officials, and most were from the Ministry of Interior. We're getting a portrait painted of the Lieberts and them taking in Johann. Curious. He's like, oh, come to think of it. He's like, an ex-official from the former East German Department of Commerce lives 10 houses from here. So the Department of Commerce, so he's not really tied in with the Ministry of the Interior. He's not really tied in possibly with the experiments. He just is a government official that might know Mr. Liebert. They're just, neighbors, right? And so he says he didn't have to take such a risk only to die if he had waited just a little longer until East Germany collapsed. It makes you wonder why he went to a free country just to be killed of all things. So that's interesting. That's very curious. So the idea is that the one guy says, why didn't Liebert wait? That's a really good question. So why didn't Liebert wait? Was it something that was like hindsight's 2020 and he just didn't know what was coming up? But you would think if he was a government official, he would kind of have like an inside know when things were about to go down. And you would think he would have some intel that would tip him off that, hey, if you just hold out a little bit longer and don't leave, things will be okay. Then the East Germany's going to collapse and it's all going to come down anyway. You won't have to leave. So that's curious. It almost makes you wonder if he left purposefully to flee the country because of this revolt, right? And so I'm going to ask that here. Did he flee with Johann because of the quote-unquote revolt? Okay. And they established, I'm going to go ahead and say that Johann wouldn't leave without Nina. He wasn't leaving without his sister, right? He wanted to make sure of that. Okay. And so they ask if he had twins, and he's like, and the guy is trying to remember, which means that if they had twins, they didn't have them very long. They had them probably just before they left the country. He's like, they adopted them from the orphanage. And he's like, they were such cute kids. He always wanted children. And so he asked where he's like, oh, well, I think it was 511 Kinderheim. Yeah. But this guy doesn't seem to know about the reputation that the orphanage has. He seems pretty innocent. He's like, oh, I think it was this orphanage. I don't know. It's somewhere over there. He talked about it. Maybe because he has connections to it. But yeah, he just talks about it and doesn't seem too involved in it. Because then when Tenma goes to find the orphanage, it's completely desolate and destroyed. Yeah. Fun times. We're going to skip this OP. Although the window that we see him standing in front of in the OP looks like that window they're talking about with the fan blade. Also, when I think of fan blades, I get like Death Note vibes. So, interesting enough, this old woman stops by and she's like, oh, they're going to turn this orphanage into a supermarket. I'm like, it's a very creepy supermarket. She's like, I'm thankful this building's going to be finally destroyed. And so he's like, do you know anyone from the orphanage? And she reminded me of the old woman in Monty Python, the Holy Grail. She's like the woman with the shrubbery. She's like, no shrubberies here. Like, she just reminded me of that. I thought that was wonderful. It was great. But yeah, she's like, someone from here. There isn't anyone. Like, I don't want to talk about it. Which now we know it was a pretty creepy place. She doesn't want to talk about it. She's like, nope, nobody's still left here. They're all gone. It's so creepy. If you want to find out, there's Hartman on 47th Street. Okay, Hartman's his name, who worked at the old Ministry of Health and Welfare. Isn't that nice? So Hartman, we'll put Hartman up here. So Hartman is in the Ministry of Health and Welfare, which is absolutely hilarious considering he's abusing this kid, right? But yeah, so Tenma's walking around, and as he goes, there's definitely some warning signs where this boy has an injury, and Deiter, now it's like the red flags are all there. Like Deiter, his injury was untreated. Like most of his injuries were untreated, and he has all these bruises and scars on him, and so it makes sense that he gets away from Tenma when he reaches for him. And so, but Tenma's pretty persistent, right? He's like, you've injured a healing wound, and it's festering. Meaning like the injuries just keep on happening. Mm-hmm. And Deiter's like, oh, someone's actually helping me. Which, it's so sad because in the OP, he looked like this, crazed little kid. I thought he was maybe Eva's kid, but no. He's this kid with the soccer ball, and he's kind of just has this negative outlook on life, and Tenma turns things around for him. And I like that he kind of eyes Tenma very suspiciously, like, I don't trust you. Like, you seem, because that's the thing. Hartman, on the outside, to others, looks completely normal and fine. But Deiter knows that can be an illusion, and it can hide a monster inside. So that's so interesting that you have Hartman, who appears kind and generous, but under that is a monster. Which you could tie that, Tenma is doing all these great things. Tenma's healing this kid and giving him this hopeful outlook on the world as he's carrying him to the hospital. But inside his coat is a gun that he's going to use to kill someone. So again, it's like that outward appearance versus what's underneath. Although, I will say, I do think that Tenma at this point is way more kind-hearted than Hartman. By far. Way more kind-hearted. Mm-hmm. So yeah, but that's, lo and behold, it's right in front of Hartman's. And then Worth's are on the second floor. Nobody's on the first floor. But yeah, so he goes up to the third floor to see the Hartman guy. And it looks like a normal house. There's photos of the kids. Everything seems normal. They're all smiling and they look like good kids. There's nothing seemingly out of place. And so they're all kids after the fall of East Germany. So the kids that he fostered, I guess we'll put that down here. The foster kids are from East Germany. Okay. All right. They're from that. Gotcha. And he's like a foster parent. It's interesting because now, I feel like nowadays, especially in Western culture, and I don't know how it is in other cultures, in the U.S., foster parents are pretty prevalent. But it's so sad because I know friends that are foster parents that are good people and they do a good job being a parent, to kids that need a home. But then you hear about foster parents that have such a bad reputation, and this is like one of those. But Tenma seems like he doesn't really understand what a foster parent is. He's like, well, I took care of them until they were adopted or went off on their own. And he seems like such a nice person. I was actually thinking, as we were having this episode take place, I was like, oh, well, here's another wonderful side character that, has all these cool layers. He's a good person. But no, that's kind of the funny thing, is that you have characters like Heckle and Moorer and Becker who kind of look sleazy or slimy on the outside. And then you peel back that layer and they're actually a good person, right? It's the Reagan-Artaka syndrome. They're actually a good person. But this guy, he looks good on the outside, but when you peel back the layers, you start to see he's rotten on the inside. And that's kind of like Johan. He looks very pristine and precious on the outside. You peel back the layers and he's rotten on the inside. The question is, Tenma looks great on the inside. is he going to stay that way, or is he going to become rotten on the inside as well? That's the question. That's what I'm curious about as we go through this series. What are we going to get, right? And so this guy knows like all this stuff about what's going on. And so he makes this idea. He's like, after the fall of socialism, I wanted to help the children in my own way. He's like, I'm poor and things haven't gone my way. It's better than the orphanages they were in. And that's when Tim was like, okay, what's this special orphanage? And he talks about 511. And that was right. And Tim was like, okay, keep talking. He's like, all orphanages in the East Germany were more or less like that. So there's this hint that there was this experimentation happening in the orphanages on the East Side. Now, experimentation doesn't have to mean anything supernatural, but it could mean, they established that this orphanage was for children of criminals and prisoners of war and people that were not thought of well by the country. So it was like, well, we can experiment on their kids because nobody's going to come looking for them. No one cares. And then, that window, special orphanages were the worst of them all. It wasn't just an institution for children with nowhere to go. It was a gathering for the children of criminals. So they established that 511, it was for children of criminals, which I don't think Johan and Anna were. Captured political offenders. So we'll put political offenders and children of those suspected of being rebels or spies. My guess is that when they came over from Czechoslovakia, that Anna was separated from Johan. And when we talk about the girl in the orphanage later, if Anna maybe had some like mental trauma, and because like the girl, she like Sims walks into the wall before the woman's like helps her find the bathroom. Like she just doesn't seem like she has much cognitive coordination there. So it could be that Anna was traumatized and they took her to that orphanage to heal. But Johan, who seems like a prodigy, was probably more on the up and up. And so they sent him to 511. He's like, that's why it was expected that they would be discriminated against and treated inhumanely. The children there couldn't do anything about their situation. And so we see this like image of the kids there in the orphanage. And it's like from his perspective, seeing all the kids in black and white, and they're all boys. They were all boys, which is interesting. Like, were you making them out to be like super soldiers? What were we doing with them? Experimenting on them? They were all boys at that academy, and all the ones he adopted and fostered were boys too. So that leads me to believe that that there's a connection there. There was a clash between socialism and totalitarianism. And he just tells Tenma, he's like, the government told the public the orphans would be re-educated and turned into model socialists. Yeah, I'm sure they were going to be re-educated and turned into like child soldiers. And maybe Johan, maybe his revolt was against that. Maybe he's like, I don't want to be your child soldier. And he led this army of kids to revolt up against the orphanage. Who knows? But that begs the question, if he did lead a revolt, like Hartman says, then how did Liebert get away with adopting him and his sister? If he led a revolt, you'd think they'd want to kill him. They'd want to get the kid out of there. Liebert must have been pretty high up on the chain to say, no, I'm going to take him with me and we'll leave the country. I don't know. Or I don't know. That's kind of the thing. Is like, if he was that big of a threat leading a revolt, then how did Lieberman get him out of Liebert, how did he get him out of the country? So there are some questions with that I'm like, I want to know. The directors and instructors were horrible. The worst ones would confiscate packages sent to the children and sell them. Which is funny because you know what that reminds me of? It reminds me of when the director at the hospital back in like episode 2 took the Werther's original bag and took it from Johan and was giving it away to his fellow doctors and then was saying he was going to sell the likenesses of the kids and sell their story for the hospital's sake. That's what it reminds me of, which Johan, if he knew that practice was being handled, he may have suspected that and took advantage of the situation because he knew what that was like. I don't know. Who were the real criminals? Right? The people, fear and violence ruled the special orphanages. So yeah, there's this idea of fear ruling, which we've established that Johann loves seeing people struggle in fear. So if fear was something that was enveloping them from the start, then Johann's just grown up in this environment without a parental figure where it's just been fear and violence, and he's not grown up normally. And Tenma's just sitting there soaking it all in. He's like, then that incident happened. And Tenma's like, what incident? Pray tell. Pray tell. He's like, yeah. So they established that Anna was somewhere else. She went to a different orphanage. She was not the same one in a different district. But I know about the brother Johan. And the whole time he's talking about it, he is terrifying. And Tenma's like, yes, I want to know about Johan. And his hand is shaking. Hartman's is. It's just shaking. Like he doesn't want to talk about it. Nobody wants to talk about Johan. Nobody wants to talk about him. It was top secret. The East government placed a strict gag order on it. And he's like, well, it was a long time ago, so I can talk about it. Sure. I feel like he's like Bilbo Baggins, where he's like with the ring, he's like, why shouldn't I have it? You know? So there was a top secret gag order. Again, how Liebert got out with him is still blowing my mind. I'm like, how? He's like, well, surely we can talk about it. And Tim was like, yes, tell us more. What did Johan do? And the moment he like looks up at him with those eyes, he's like, a revolt. And Tim was like, huh? This little kid? A revolt? What? And that's when Deiter shows up. Mm-hmm. He's like, Deiter, we have a guest. And that's when he notices him. And the moment he said, what's with your attitude, that should have been a red flag. So I'm like, Deiter didn't do anything wrong. He just didn't answer the question immediately. And Tim is like, oh no, it's okay. We met. It's fine. And so he stays for dinner because Deiter asks him to stay. He doesn't want him to leave because he doesn't want to be alone with Hartman because Hartman's going to abuse him. It's disgusting. Nope. And you know what the crazy thing is? You have the mercenary Hugo. There we go. I was struggling to find his name earlier. Hugo the mercenary. With the daughter. You have a literal trained killer who is in battle after battle after battle, murdered this girl's mom, and self-defense technically, but he's a trained killer, and he was so kind to that little girl. And then you have a guy who's basically just a department government official who is so horrible to Deiter. Like, it's the contrast in that is fascinating, right? And then the guy, you can tell that the guy is not happy when he looks down at Deiter, and he's just like, But at the time, before we realize that he's abusing Deiter, it doesn't sink in that look. He gives Deiter that look like get away from him. Are you going to tell? Are you going to do something you're going to regret? But then he hides it and his face melts and he's like, oh, why don't you have dinner with us? You know, just prolong this beating I'm about to give this kid. And Tim was like, sure, I'll stay. And they have this dinner. And then during the dinner, he says, oh, you say you're a freelance journalist. Does that mean you're going to write an article about the things that you've investigated? And he's like, yeah, which to me, I almost thought Hartman was going to be like, well, don't talk about this, right? Because this is top secret. I'm giving you information. Don't publish this in your article, okay? And he says, this is one thing I want you to emphasize. And he says, the development of a child depends on the adult that raises him. Okay. So he had this idea, I guess I'll put it over here, that the development of a child depends on the adult that raises them. And he tells Deiter says later on that the reason that Hartman is like that is he says that the future is dark and I have to be strong. Which is bullshit. You shouldn't abuse a kid and then say that it's to make them stronger for this dark future. That's just dumb. But it's kind of like just such a slap in the face of his own words. Like he's, abusing this kid. He may have been abused when he was a kid, but he's passing it on down to this kid, and this kid will only know violence. And Tenma tries to talk him out of it. He's like, no. He's like, we must lead children in the right direction, which is not what you were doing, sir. That's when children can have pleasant dreams. Ugh. And it's just lip service, right? Maybe he believes it, but it's messed up. And he asked Deiter what Deiter's dreams are. And Deiter's like, I just want a soccer ball. Like, that's all that kid wants. God, and I was like, I thought this whole time that, like, the moment he started talking about Johan, it was like game, set, and match that this guy, that Hartman was going to die. But no, instead, when he closes the door, the look he gives Deiter, that Deiter's just standing there. Oh, and Dieter's up against the wall. Like he's expecting it. Oh. Oh, it's awful. It's hard. It is very, very, very hard to watch. Nope. And so he goes in and gets a soccer ball, and just like with Junkers, he's going back to give the soccer ball to the kid, and here's the kid screaming. And he's been like hit in the face. He's had his clavicle broken. He has all these bruises. And Tenma does his job as a doctor. Ugh. And it's just gruesome. Like all those bruises and scars. Like these scars, like everything. Like it's just been constant. Like the kid had broken ribs and a broken clavicle. And then here's the thing. He says he called the ambulance, but Tenma's like, I'm going to stay here with the kid to make sure he's all right. And then Hartman's like, well, you can go now. I'm like, how do you even know if he called the ambulance or not? You don't, right? You don't know if he called the ambulance or not. He went to the other room. So he may very well have not called the ambulance and just wanted Tenma to leave, right? But Tenma's like, no, I'm not leaving this kid. And then he said, are you a doctor? And then he puts two and two together and realizes who Tenma is. He's like, shouldn't you run away? And then Tenma's like, screw you, I'm taking this kid. And he says, you did this, didn't you? And he says, did what? You were abusing Deiter. And he's like, abusing? Don't say such ill-willed things about me. That's probably the scariest part about this episode, is that we, the audience, would know it as abuse. But again, tying back to this idea, Hartman doesn't see anything wrong. Hartman doesn't see anything wrong with what he's doing. He's like, no, this isn't abuse. I'm just, teaching this kid. Why would you say such things about me? Like, he doesn't think he's in the wrong. And he even asks Deiter to back him up. And Deiter can't because he's in so much pain. And then Tim was like, I'm taking my bag, my soccer ball, bye. But yeah, he's like, first murder, now kidnapping. That's the thing, is that Tenma is creating such a track record for himself, right? Because this guy's going to go turn him in. This Hartman's going to go turn him in. He's going to tell everybody that Tenma kidnapped his kid. Lunge is going to be like, well, what's this I see? Like Tenma's just digging it. And the thing that's so sad about it is that Tenma's going to get turned in for kidnapping when he was saving that kid from an abusive home. It's like, damn it. It's rough. And then he's like, the doctors will get you better. And then it's so sad because Dieter's like, Mr. Hartman always makes me better. Like ugh. And Tim was like, no. And he stops to catch his breath, holding on to this kid. And he's like, you're covered in injuries and you've never been to a hospital? And he says, I'm afraid right now and he says, the world is full of bad things. That's why I have to be strong. And he's like, and Tim was like, did Mr. Hartman tell you that? He said, the world is dark and the future is dark. And I love that Tenma, he looks so distraught about that because he's like, kid, nah. He's like, no, that's not how the world is. I love that he says, that's not true. It's a big lie that the world is dark. And the boy's like, really? He says, yes, it's true. And then he gives him the soccer ball. Oh. Like, tomorrow will be a good day. Don't jinx yourself, Tenma. Don't jinx yourself. Maybe for Deiter it will be. But I do love that Tenma, like, offers him this, like, moment of solace where he's like, it's going to be okay. He's like, you'll be fine. He's like, the world is not dark and terrible as you've been told. He's like, it can be good. And you'll see. Everything will be fine. I'm like, for Deiter's sake, I hope so. But what's funny is that he goes to the hospital. He knows the system. He knows who to talk to get the kids some medical attention. But they say that there's been a big emergency, that there was an accident where the bus driver died. Now, if that has anything to do with anything, we don't know, right? We have no clue how that factors into the equation. But then we see all the doctors. We need to ask the truck driver about the circumstances. He's broke both of his legs, but he can still talk, right? And Tenma's like trying not to be seen by the doctors. And the nurse is like, well, you've turned your head away, sir. Is there anything else you want to do? And so he tells her to watch after the boy and not let him go with anyone else. Like, make him stay there at the hospital and seek attention while he goes and finds information. And at first, I wanted Tenma to stick around with Deiter, but he really couldn't afford to because of the cops there. And also, what else is he going to do? He can't out himself as a doctor. He can only leave Deiter there at the hospital for those people to take care of. And then that's it, right? And for now, that's all he can do. I do love the use of shadows in this episode, where we see the shadow of him with the doctor's bag walking away. It's very interesting. It keeps up our tradition of using shadows in our storytelling, right? What to do with Deiter. Even if I go to the police, I can't go with him. It's so cool how they use shadows. And he's like, I don't know much about Johann's sister. So he decides to ask around and find out where she is. Her orphanage is a much better looking orphanage. It at least looks like it's been maintained. And so he asks about this woman taking in Deiter. And she's like, no. She's like, I'm not going to take somebody in from a suspicious looking guy like you. Absolutely not. Why would you expect me to do such a thing? And he's like, I know it's an unreasonable request, but this kid needs help. And she's like, no. She's like, I know that the kid's being abused, but I don't know who you are. So I can't really take in a kid without knowing who's dropping him off. And so, but the moment he mentions Anna Liebert, she changes her tune real quick. She's like, oh, how is Anna? Like, she's like, how is she? You know, like he connects with her, right? So Anna apparently was favored at the orphanage. She was right as rain. Everybody liked her, apparently. At least this woman did. She's like, how nostalgic. Is she well? And he's like, oh yeah, she's at a university in Heidelberg. And she's like, oh, I see. She is doing well. She was a nice girl. I knew she was adopted by Mr. Liebert of the Trade Commission, along with her twin brother. She's like, what was his name? He's like, Johan. She's like, oh, yes. She's like, they were very close. I felt sorry for them. So once they were placed with separate orphanages. Those two were really alone before they came here. So she said that they were close. The two were close. And came from Czechoslovakia. Okay. And Tim was like, they were taken into custody near the border of Czechoslovakia. And that goes back to Anna saying that there were just bodies and bodies. Like it was the middle of the war. There was just dead bodies all around them. And they were holding hands as they walked. And it shows that what's interesting is that the background there of the border looks like, what's really interesting is that you have Johan, who looks like he has a bag, right? In the flashback, Johan has a bag. What's in the bag? Like, there's that. But the border that they're at looks like the border. It looks like the location that Tenma ends up at the very end of the OP, is what it looks like. It looks like the spot that Tenma is standing in at the end of the OP is the spot at the Czech border that they're at. So maybe we are going to switch course. Maybe Tenma is going to end up at this border to, like, investigate and find whatever it is. And she's like, we're not like 511 Kinderheim. And she just looks at me and he's like, what about it? And then that's when the little girl goes. And the woman, she like really takes care of the little girl and sends her on her way. She says you only need, what did she say there? You only need love in order to develop as a person. Like Hartman says, the development of a child depends on the adult. But the woman at the orphanage says you only need love to develop. And you could tie those two things together. You need the love of a parent. That would be the most ideal. But she says you need love in order to develop as a person. And she's very grave as she says this. She says the orphanages on the east side were quite horrible. Even this place was once referred to as Orphanage 47. Ugh. She says, but what we did what we could so we wouldn't be controlled by the government even just a little, in order to avoid becoming like 511 Kinderheim. She's like, it was a special orphanage run by both the Health and Welfare and the Ministry of the Interior. So yeah, the Hartman guy knew. She's like, do you know what that means? The real estate of affairs was being managed by the Ministry of the Interior. It was East Germany's experimental laboratory. And so she talks about how the two of them never really had a parent. So that they were without parents. Were they without love? That's the thing. I feel like what this is setting up is this dichotomy between Johan and Anna, where Anna, both of them came in without being raised by a parent, which was bad enough. But I feel like Anna was able to get love as she was at the orphanage, and it caused her to develop normally. But Johan did not receive the same love or any love and developed into the monster that we see. So that's interesting. The idea that these kids, one was loved, one was not, and that lack of love festering into something monstrous. That's fascinating to me. I think that's interesting. But yeah, and then that's the episode. So yeah, hopefully I didn't get spoiled, but we'll see. I'll probably have to watch ahead just to be safe, so that nobody in the comments tries to spoil me with anything. But we'll see, right? We'll see what happens next, eh? So I don't know. So please, if you are going to talk spoilers, please spoiler tag. Or if you're on Discord, please black box so that I don't know, because I'm only 11 episodes in and I don't want a major spoiler ruining the experience of the show for me. So, but otherwise, thank you all so much. I hope you guys enjoyed this reaction and discussion. I'm curious to know your thoughts about Hartman, this episode, and the themes of love and parenting and the orphanages down below. But in the meantime, I hope you all have a wonderful week. Please stay safe. Take care. And yeah, I'll be back very soon with episode 12 of Monster. Bye.